Veterans Voice is a show that connects veterans and active members of the military to qualified guests who help you find programs and benefits you qualify for and discuss housing, education, career training, and other topical matters. Every show addresses issues that affect your life. Each week, Veterans Voice will begin with a story from one of our veterans about his or her experiences in the military. We want to thank these veterans for sharing these stories with us. Call in and share your experience. 781-837-4900. And now, a voice from one of our veterans.
The Battlemind presentation talks about what it's like for the service member over in battle and how the mind operates, and then how it is transitioning home. This will go over a lot of the special mental health considerations for returning veterans. There's a lot of different issues that the veterans struggle through, and a lot of them are something that they may feel alone struggling with, so we want to make sure to be able to get out there. And as important as it is to provide the veterans and the family members with the information on what's going on, we also feel we have to provide other service providers and community members with. The Battlemind goes over a lot of the continuation of the transition home. On your screen now, you should see a picture of me serving over in Iraq. I love when I get to give this presentation in person, because you can actually see me now. I'm in a shirt and tie versus the Army uniform. I weigh about 35 pounds less. And you might question if it's the same person or not. And I use this, our clinician put this in there, and what we like to use this for is to hope that everyone can recognize that when you come across a veteran who is struggling, whether it be drugs or alcohol or your mental health issues, remember them for that man or woman they are, and show them that respect and the treatment, and they'll be that much more likely to react to the treatment in a positive way, even though they may look completely different than what you hear through the story. So the Battlemind is the soldier's inner strength to face fear and adversity in combat with courage. And there's a few key components of the Battlemind, which can include the self-confidence. When we were deployed over there, the military makes you believe that there is nothing that you can't do. We take calculated risks, which at times will involve, going in that house could ultimately lead to your death or someone's death around you, but it's a job that you do, and you take that calculated risk. We learn how to handle challenge. Any challenges thrown at us. The mental toughness that the military trains you to have is part of the challenge we have with veterans returning home, with the stigma and thinking that they can do things on their own or get past it on their own. Overcoming obstacles and setbacks is a major thing when you're in a combat environment. I don't think anything ever went as planned. There was always some type of an obstacle or a setback, but the one thing we always knew is no matter how many steps you take back, you keep moving forward, and that was how we did it. And the ability to maintain positive thoughts during times of adversity and challenge. And that's a huge thing to be able to do when you're in such a negative and highly deadly environment at times, to maintain positive thoughts even during those times and challenging times. So the Battlemind skills will help us stay alive over in combat, but more often than not, they can also cause a lot of problems if we don't adapt them properly when we get home. Battlemind checks, which allow the service members and their clinical staff to identify if and when the help is needed, and help us as veterans recognize when these symptoms or signs are coming out, and give us ways to kind of check ourselves and see how we can de-escalate or ground ourselves to not go down the road that it might have led to. The word Battlemind, within the word Battlemind, each letter in the word stands for something, and almost each and every one of us has a family member, if not someone close to us, that has served in the military at one point in time, and we can all do our own little part to help each person get through whatever transition they may be going through, whether they came home 40 years ago from Vietnam and still haven't been able to transition, or they came home 4 days ago. And there's a lot of services out there for both the veterans and also the family members to help the family members get through the issues that the veterans are going through. Each letter in the word Battlemind will have a slide that goes with it, and we'll break this down by both what's on the slide and then also the personal experiences that I'll use. So in combat, in the first slide, is buddies or cohesion versus withdrawal. And in combat, we may believe that no one understands our experience that we have over there except the men and women who were there and experienced it with us. When at home, we may prefer to be with our battle buddies rather than a spouse, family members, or other friends, and we may even avoid speaking about ourselves to our friends and other family members. When we go overseas, in the relationship we have, and I was in an all-male infantry unit, so we were all men stuck on one small vehicle, all from different corners of the earth, and it was very strange at first being with everyone from all over the country and different attitudes, different accents, and different ways of living life. But within a couple months, you develop a relationship with them, and it's a love that you have for your battle buddy that is completely separate than you could ever have for a family member or a friend, although it can be just as tense. And I always try to explain the difference being that when you love your family member, your spouse, your friend growing up or whatever it may be, you don't expect them, that they could be gone at the next minute or around the next corner, or that, you could be gone and it could be for them to be able to live. So the meaning of buddy, it can be a very loose term when you say it back here, calling someone your buddy. Over in combat, when you have a battle buddy, that's someone who you go everywhere with and would die at any instant for you, and that you would also die for at any point in time. And transition in that combat skill can become very difficult when coming home, and a lot of us, like the slide says, may avoid speaking about ourselves to both friends and family, and that comes down to many different things, whether it's not wanting to relive the experiences or just not wanting your friends and family to know when you're over there you're a different person than when you're here, and that's what the Battlemind does to you. It prepares you to live and survive in a very highly lethal environment over there and deal with things that most people don't have to deal with at all in life. So when you come home and you have your family and friends, it's hard to relate to them because they may not have had those experiences, and one thing, you may not want them to see you as that person you became to live over there versus the person who you are when you come back home. And we're all definitely different in one way or another when we come home. It doesn't have to be a negative impact on life. You can find just as many positives out of the experiences as you can negatives. It's just a matter of how you look at it, and I feel how we perceive it. And I've gone through a lot of this with my friends and family back home. And at the bottom of the slide it says transition in that combat skill and cohesion. Combat results in bonds with fellow soldiers that will last a lifetime. Back home, their friends and family have changed, and reestablishing these bonds takes time and work. And also for my family members to understand why holidays can be tough when it's a room full of 20 people. Family or not, it can still be a very highly stressful environment when you're in a room full of that many people. So for things to transition, it takes both work on the veteran side of it, but also on the veterans or the family members and friends side of it. With the SAVE program, I've come across a lot of non-combat veterans, peacetime veterans that have suffered through a lot of the same issues, transitional issues or similar issues as the combat veterans did, and we don't try to treat it any differently other than the fact that there may be some additional resources or benefits for a combat veteran, but we always try to treat them the same and what they perceive as what's going on in their life as the same. And I always felt that the training is what built us up to be ready to go and do the job we did over there, and of course we have to deal with that. For the men and women who go through all that training, and it's very intensive training for anywhere from 4 to some MMOSs go up to 12, 18 months long of training, and then to not ever get to fully affect your job in the military, I think can be just as challenging as training so hard and then getting to do your job. So either way, we have a lot of great resources for them. So the next slide is A in Battlemind, which is accountability versus controlling. So in combat, maintaining control of every single minor detail is essential for survival. When you get given a task, every little detail of that task has to be done. Every bullet has to be accounted for. Every weapon has to be clean. I mean, everything has to be done, and you can't let anything go. We're at home when we come home where that may help us in combat, but we may not let others share in making minor decisions or try to control things that really don't matter or even overreact to minor events and make them into more of a major event. It's very challenging when you're over there, no matter what rank you're at while deployed, whether you're the lowest enlisted machine gunner, a team leader, a squad leader, you're always the one who has to make some type of decisions and pay attention to all the details, or else the decision you make could be ultimately deadly for you and the men and women around you. When coming home, these decisions, and especially when it comes down to family decisions or taking control of things that really don't matter, can affect relationships with either it's a spouse that you live with, friends that you live with, just hanging out with your family. So to share those decision-making processes can be hard. Once that's learned, shared, you'll see that you can take a lot of stress off yourself. The next slide is T, and the first T is targeted aggression versus inappropriate aggression. over in combat, target aggression involves making split-second decisions that are lethal in a highly ambiguous environment, which keeps the service member and our buddies alive. Where at home we may be easily irritated, get in a fights or heated arguments, assault, spousal abuse, snapping at the children or your friends or even your non-commissioned officer or whoever your leader is once you're back here and you're in the civilian work set. Now, over in combat, they gave us the time to have our de-escalation time, I would say, where we would be out on missions and we were off the base more than we were on the base, but when we came back to the base, we had hot food, we had six men in a 2-man room, so at least we had a room. We had decent living environment, and then we were also able to call home most of the time unless it was within a communication blackout. So we had that time to kind of turn the switch off and go, and then we go back out on patrol an hour later, be able to flip that switch on and be able to get that aggression out. And transitioning that combat skill can be extremely difficult. And on the slide it talks about how in combat the enemy is the target. Back home there are no enemies, so you don't have that enemy to release your aggression on. One of the other huge challenges, and I've struggled with this and I know a lot of veterans I've worked with is coming overseas, you don't know who the enemy is, and especially over in Iraq. There was plenty of terrorists that fought in westernized clothing. They didn't have the turbans on their head. They didn't have the big beards that you see on the TV. They looked like every other local national Iraqi citizen in the marketplace. But then, it could be a man, woman, or child, and they could look the same, and the next thing you know, they're launching an assault on you, or they just blew themselves up. So you never know who the enemy exactly is over there. When you come home, and I know there's a professor on the line and some students, picture a young veteran returning home, and he finally, gets school all set up, goes back to school, and he's in the middle of a classroom with, 90-some-odd students in that one class, and he can't stop looking around, or she can't stop looking around and wondering what everyone else around them is doing and not being able to pay attention to the teacher. And that could be him or her kind of flashing back to that area where there was such a big crowd and such a condensed area, and it was his job or her job to try to pick out who was the bad person, if there was a bad person, which a lot of the time there wasn't even, but you were still always on guard whenever you were in an area like that. The next slide is the other T in Battlemind, and this stands for tactical awareness versus hypervigilance. So in combat, our survival depends on us being aware of our surroundings at all times and reacting immediately to any sudden changes. There wasn't a time over there, and it didn't matter if you were up for 3 days and you were staring down a pitch black field in the middle of the night. Your job is to focus and pay attention to every single little detail and to ensure that you are ready and prepared to react to any type of sudden change, which over there a sudden change could be something not so bad, but it could be a life-threatening sudden change. What that does when coming home is now we may feel easily startled, anxious, having the nightmares, and we realize a lot of veterans are consuming not only alcohol but also using different pain medications and other things that kind of help them to sleep at night or let go of those nerves and help them kind of get rid of the hypervigilance so they can get some rest at night. And transition in this combat skill can be extremely challenging, and tactical awareness is key over in country. Combat requires alertness and sustained attention. Back home, it takes time to learn to relax. It's hard for me even still today when I go out sometimes fishing. I'm on a lake all by myself and there's nothing going on and it's quiet. My wife will wonder why I'm getting nervous and looking around. And over in Iraq, when we were in anywhere and it was quiet and the streets were empty, that was usually a sign that there was something bad to come or something was going to happen or there might be an attack launched on you. Hypervigilance, too, 2 sounds, lights, movements on the periphery. So that's you're always paying attention to everything all around you, and anything can spark that hypervigilance or that flashback or whatever you may experience once you get back to that point. And that's once again where we'd like to use the Battlemind checks to help them understand. So the next letter is L, and this stands for lethally armed versus locked and loaded at home. And in combat, we carry our weapons everywhere loaded at all times, and it was mandatory and necessary. And now when we come home, we may feel we need to have that weapon on us, either in our home, in our car, or on us at all times. And we may even believe that ourselves and our loved ones, almost our loved ones more importantly than ourselves, are not safe without that weapon. I know I was fortunate when I came home injured. I got to have convalescence leave up in Alaska for almost a year, where I was up there with my spine injury recovering. Now up there, it was weird for someone to not carry a pistol everywhere they went, so I had a little more freedom in carrying it, and I think the gun laws were a little looser up there than here in Massachusetts. I didn't go anywhere without my weapon up there. Even going on the base, I brought my weapon. Off the base, I brought my weapon. I rigged it on my bed so I could flick my wrist and have it in my hand. I wouldn't open my door without my weapon in my hand to my house, even though I had a peephole. transitioning that combat skill can be extremely hard. Where in combat, it's dangerous to be unarmed, but at home it can be very dangerous to be armed. And we've actually had, my new job right now that I've taken with SAVE has focused on the criminal justice system and jail diversion programs. And what we've realized is there's quite a few veterans getting in trouble for not only possessing firearms, but pulling them out in a threatening manner towards other people. And I have not yet had another veteran shoot at the other person, but by pulling that weapon out and being back here in America, that's then a threatening, and a lot of them are getting charged with assault and battery with a deadly weapon. And for the most part, a lot of these veterans are bringing these weapons from other parts of the country where they were on the base and not transferring the registration, so that now picks them up with concealing an unregistered weapon, which is another whole charge. So coming back into the Battlemind trade, and we're on the letter E, which is the last letter in the word battle. So this stands for the emotional control that we learn to develop while serving in the military versus the anger and detachment that it can transfer to, or at least be perceived to transfer to when coming home, especially around family and friends. So in combat, controlling our emotions during combat is critical for the mission to succeed. And by saying controlling your emotions, that's not just when you're having a bad day or feel depressed or a little sad. That means, if you're walking in that house and the guy in front of you gets shot and killed, your job is to control those emotions, to want to either kneel down and help him or go the other way and to step forward over that person and eliminate the threat and then come back to try to render aid or do what you can. So it's a lot of training that goes into having us be able to control our emotions. When at home, failing to display these emotions or only showing anger, which is the emotion that we always got to show over there, around family and friends will only damage our relationships with them. And we may even be seen as being detached or uncaring, which a lot of times I feel we just don't know or are uncomfortable around those types of situations because we weren't for so long. And for me, it was 16 straight months of, my squad of infantrymen driving around together for 16 months, and there wasn't too much emotional stuff that went on. And even when we did lose, fellow soldiers over there, I know that when we lost Master Sergeant Tony Yost and PFC Alcoza, I was pretty good friends with Alcoza, knew his fiance, he had been in the house for dinner. We were out in that ambush and that fight for about 10 to 14 hours that day. You come back and you realize what has happened, and you get the flight line service to say goodbye, and then you have a small memorial service within your unit. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the boots, the weapon, and for the Master Sergeant it was his Green Beret, and for Chris it was the helmet with their dog tags over it. And you have that time to let the emotions out and kind of mourn over the loss. But as soon as you leave there, your mission is back on, and your job needs to kick back in. And I can say that before that memorial service we went to for those two, my platoon was on a 4-day mission out at the television station guarding it. We came back for that, and then shortly after, one of the lead vehicles had been hit by an IED. So before it and immediately after, we were placed right back into that combat mode. So going back to this slide, in transitioning the combat skill of emotional control versus anger and attachment, in combat, like I said, controlling emotions is absolutely necessary. Where at home, it limits emotion. The limited emotion leads to relationship failures, and it can be anything from being able to deal with, the wife or the mom crying over the dog dying, and you just, you don't deal with death well, or something as little as cuddling on the couch with me. I haven't wanted to cuddle since I've come home. I'm not good at showing the emotional side, and once again, the military taught me pretty intensely at how to do away with my emotions. Unfortunately, for a lot of the men and women who return home, we don't always get given, or trained how to be a father or a husband or an uncle or a grandfather or a child for that fact. So we have to kind of transition through all that and learn. But at the same time, we also have to provide for our families, work a job, go to your doctor's appointments, and do all the other normal everyday living things while trying to transition through a lot of these issues. M is the first letter in mine. Mission OPSEC, which is operational security versus secretness. Over in combat, we would talk about the mission with only those who needed to know, and we felt that we would only talk about our combat experiences primarily with our unit members because we were the ones there. And a lot of that comes down to, if you know that you're prepping to go and raid a terrorist stronghold 2 nights from now, the last thing you want to be doing is talking about it in the chow hall where the people who we had as our interpreters were local national Iraqi citizens. Some of the Iraqi army would be on our base, and you just never knew which ones you could trust or not trust. Biggest factors we have on our side overseas is the element of surprise. The speed, the surprise, and the violence of action is how we maintained as a unit and were able to be as successful as we were. So to give that up takes away, a third of our element that we have. And coming home, the need to know now includes your family and friends. And I worked with one veteran where his wife and him were literally going to get a divorce because he would not tell her when he was just going to the market basket or going down to the gun store or going to see his buddy. And he would just, well, I'm just going out, I'll be back, which only further complicated everything else going on. And fortunately, we were able to reach out, and the vet center had some great marriage counseling type programs, and we're able to help the spouse understand why he was doing that, and that it had nothing to do with wanting to lie to her, but was almost, part of his training and what he did, and that is something that he has to transition through. And we feel that once the family members are educated on what's going on, it's that much easier for them to deal with it. So moving on to the next slide, should see the letter I coming up, which is individual responsibility versus guilt. Over in combat, like I said, no matter what, whether you're the command sergeant major or the E1 machine gunner, everybody has their responsibility over there. And the responsibility in combat is to survive and do your best to keep your buddies alive. And you do that by looking at all the past lives with attention to detail, never letting your guard down, emotional control. All these things come into your responsibility and covering down what your job is. We're at home, we may feel that we have failed our buddies, especially if they were killed or seriously injured, and we may be bothered by the memories of those wounded or killed. I know coming home, a lot of the things that we can look back at, we can always kind of oversee it, and I remember the ambush I was in where it feels like when I think about it in my head, it's almost like replaying a movie. Only the camera is me, I guess, and I'm looking down at it, and of course, I've learned no matter what I do in life, there's always a what if, or well, what if I had done this in my job today? I could have said this during the presentation. I feel like the same thing can go for over there, that there's always going to be that what if, in the one time that I had a terrorist, within feet and had him in my sights, I didn't get a shot off that one time, and they used to hide and shoot at us a lot, so that was the opportunity. The house had blown up before I got to shoot, but to me, my guilt was I didn't turn, aim, and shoot quick enough, and maybe that house would not have blown up. And then subsequently, Tony and the 16 Iraqi Army members wouldn't have died going in the house behind him. So coming home, there was a lot of guilt involved with that for me, and I didn't know it at the time. I walked off the plane, I think it was December 6th of 2006, and we walked off with our legs, arms, and our head, and we figured we were all good and we were ready to go back. And as the months went on and time went on, we started realizing all these little things that were kind of coming out and dealing with. And one of the biggest things for me was the guilt. And I was fortunate to be sent off base to get therapy, and I participated in EMDR therapy. And the VA offers that, as well as like cognitive behavioral therapy, which can really help. You can never change the ending or what went on over there, but we can change the service members' perception of how things went or what could have happened. And one of the biggest things we do with the SAVE program is we focus on not only the perception of their mental health, but the perception of all of the health of the returning service members, and how the services and benefits can help increase their perception of life, their health, everything around them. And we feel once they're doing that, their odds are accessing the services, and by changing their perception, you've given them that little bit of hope. And I have been involved with several crisis calls and interventions with the police, with veterans with firearms threatening to kill themselves or hurt other people. And by offering hope, we've always had a good outcome. And by not only understanding, but understanding that their issue is real to them, and not downplaying their issue at all, even though we may not think it's a crisis, and offering them that little bit of hope, we've been able to take some of that guilt or shame away and have them start receiving those services that they need. And now transitioning that combat skill and the responsibility, in the heat of battles, we must act. We make life or death decisions. It's learning from these decisions without second guessing. And like I said, I'll end this presentation, and I could say what if to 100 different slides, and I could have added this, or I could have, spoke louder or slower, I could have done this. You can do that with every job, and we just have to learn how to focus on a lot of the better memories. I was there for 16 long months, and we were an offensive combat operations unit the whole time. I was with the infantry, and I can say that I have a lot more good memories that come out of my service over in Iraq than I could ever have bad. And when I call and talk to my buddies, although, it's coming up tomorrow, is actually the anniversary of the ambush that we were in. So we'll talk about it then, but a lot of times we talk about the good memories and the good things we did versus, the bad things that happened and that went on. And by doing that, it kind of changes things a little bit for us, and we can focus on that and kind of move forward with life by focusing on the good versus just the negative. But at the same time, sometimes the trauma can be so devastating to this young man or woman that they can't focus on it, and that's where we rely heavily on the VA and getting them into some treatment that will really help them stabilize and get back into, being a student or going back to work, or just, stabilize enough to live a comfortable life where they feel happy at the way life is going. And moving on to the next slide, which is the letter N, and this is non-defensive combat driving versus aggressive driving. I get very angry very quickly on the road. Driving has been very challenging, and keeping in mind when we were And over there in combat, it took unpredictable driving, fast, rapid lane changes, straddling the middle lane, keeping other vehicles at a distance of 50 meters or more. And this is all designed to avoid either roadside bomb attacks or vehicle bombing. And I know with our unit, we had a rule that, if a vehicle was approaching within that, you shot one warning shot, and if they didn't stop, you were then had permission to light up that vehicle as it was seen as a threat. And in the time we were over there, they were driving a lot of bombs into us. With the strikers, they had a lot harder time damaging our vehicles, so they would take it to the extreme. So that's a decision that we would also have to make in a split second, because 50 meters is not that far away, nor is 100 meters. And within that 100 to 50 meter mark, you're making all these decisions that quick, and a lot of the time, or some of the time, you don't always make the right decision, both good or bad, and ultimately you're going to have to deal with the consequences. Coming home, the aggressive driving leads to the speeding tickets, accidents, fatalities, and a lot of times we may be chasing an adrenaline high or often get angry while driving. It's definitely an adrenaline high to go 100 miles an hour down the highway. When I do that, I'm not necessarily looking for that adrenaline high, but it could be that someone just cut me off and also, kind of came close to me and kind of threw me back into that mind where I perceived it as a threat. It's a lot harder to blow someone up or shoot at them when they're going 100 than it is going 50. And in that state of mind, you are perceiving that as a threat. So that's you got that fight or flight mentality. And sometimes it's easier to just keep moving forward through the kill zone and then deal with it. We also had a situation where we had a veteran who got blown up at a checkpoint over in Iraq. All of a sudden, he called us saying that they took away his license because he had about over $5,000 in fines from running the tolls, coming in the Western tolls when he was coming in for his appointments and for his job. And now by him losing his license, that took away his ability to work, to do his appointments, and took away a lot of those freedoms that he fought for. We had already been working with this young man since he had been returning home and helping him through a lot of the issues. We were able to get with the Mass Highway Department, go down there and meet with them and figure out an alternative plan for them. And what they did is they did away with all the penalties and fines, understanding why it was happening, gave him the speed pass and made sure that it was updated. And then he still, the last thing we wanted to do is say, oh, well, it's okay, you're a veteran, you can do that. He still paid the fines he wanted, paid the tolls, which he wanted to do. So as I said earlier, in combat, driving fast is necessary to avoid danger, but back home, driving fast feels right. But it's extremely dangerous, and you'll see at the end of the slides when I go over some other points, motor vehicle accidents and especially motorcycle accidents are one of the leading causes of death in veterans returning home post-deployment. And I was in Alaska where a traffic jam was 5 cars at one stoplight, and that's meaning 5 at all 4 sides of that intersection. And then all of a sudden I came home to having to drive from Haverhill to Boston every day in rush hour traffic. And next thing you know, I'm yelling at the guy next to me because he tried to turn versus just letting him go. So it can be extremely challenging. It still is very challenging for me, as I think my colleagues would attest to. But I've been able to work on it and work with my therapists because I can recognize, by using those Battlemind checks, I can recognize when it's happening now. And so the D stands for discipline and ordering versus conflict. So in combat, our survival depends on discipline and obeying orders. And I was always taught from one of my platoon sergeants I had that when he asked us to do something, we should say, why not? Walk 10 miles instead of driving when the trucks are right there. Well, they told you to walk. It doesn't matter that the trucks are right there. And now when we come home, the inflexible interactions or order and demanding behaviors with our spouse, children, or friends often lead to conflict. And it can be as simple as something in the tone in your voice or in how you ask. In the military, you're asking, you're not really asking, you're ordering. But when you develop that relationship where although we had a very clear chain of command and I knew when Sergeant Hamlin told me to do it, I did it, or Sergeant Ober told Sergeant Hamlin he did it, and when I came home and had soldiers under me, I expected when I asked them to do something, they were going to do it. And this all involves, and it comes down to, when you see someone using physical fitness as a punishment because that soldier didn't pick up the rapper he or she was asked to, that could really ultimately transpire into being over in Iraq, and when your squad leader tells you to kick that door, you look at it and say, why? The house might blow up. So you have to learn how to have the discipline to take orders, but not only that, but also giving the orders. Unfortunately, when you want your son to ask you a question, you can't be like, well, you got to go to your older sister who goes to your mother, and then she'll come to me to ask the question. It doesn't really work like that, coming home with the family, and sometimes, for some reason or another, we may expect it to go like that, and it becomes extremely challenging for the family members to deal with it, and they can see it as something you're taking out against them, or even if it's something like asking, hey, hon, can you go pick up that stick? Instead, you may be like, hey, go pick up that stick. when really in your mind you're just asking in your military way of asking, but to that spouse, that's not necessarily asking, that's more of a demanding behavior, and I haven't met too many spouses that like that, whether it's a wife or a husband. So that was the end of the Battlemind presentation. The next slide talks about other state resources. I've already talked about the Welcome Home bonus. Some of the federal resources here in Massachusetts, we have 5 different major VA hospitals in Bedford, Northampton, Brockton, JP, and West Roxbury. This is Given Hour, which provides counseling services, private, pro bono, completely for veterans. It's completely free. The Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts, and like I said, SHIP, which is the statewide head injury program, they have been a huge resource for us.